And one of the things that fascinates me the most about movies is some of the projects that were supposed to be something and became something different, or some projects that were supposed to be something and never became anything. And remembering some of the examples of these failed projects, I realized that Batman and Superman are probably the heroes that have more examples in their careers. And before talking about both of them, there were many attempts to make a Flash movie in the past as well. There was an 80s version that could possibly be starred by Michael J. Fox. There was a 2000s version that was written by David S. Goyer and would be starred by Ryan Reynolds. After Ezra Miller showed up as the character for the first time, there were about 20 scripts written and about 20 directors coming in and going out of the project. One of the scripts had the Ray Fisher Cyborg's character as Flash's partner in the movie, and even Ezra Miller himself wrote a version of the script with the comic book writer Grant Morrison. But when we talk about cancelled projects, Batman and Superman are the champions. And to talk about these projects, we have to go back way in the past, in the time of Adam West's TV show, and I mentioned this movie in my video of crossovers, and that was supposed to be a crossover between Batman and Godzilla. In the story, Batman and the boy wonder Robin were supposed to travel to Tokyo in Japan and meet with the giant lizard. Oh man, I wish I could sing that. In the 80s, there were rumors about a movie version that would feature the comedic style following the Adam West's version, and that would be starred by Bill Murray as Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin. Thank God that never happened. Then the first attempt to make a serious version of the character came in the hands of the writer Tom Mankiewicz, a writer that was very important for Superman that we will talk later as well. And this script that I actually read would show Batman and Bruce Wayne's origins, with the boy growing and developing his skills around the world in travels, to finally become Batman at certain points. Something that Batman Begins did it later as well. But the movie would also feature some fantasy elements like the inclusion of the villains Joker and Penguin, a flying Batmobile, and the climax that would have a final battle between Batman and Joker in a museum where they would fight atop of a giant typewriter. I remember liking this script. A very good attempt to bring the character for the first time to the movie screen, but there were some elements about Batman's origin that were not very well fleshed, and Batman Begins covered them better, like the creation of the Bat Armor, or the Bat Gadgets in the cave, something like that. And at the late 80s, when Tim Burton was hired to be the director of the project, he thought the script was too similar to Superman from 1978, showing the character's journey since his humble beginnings until he finally became the hero of the title. So trying to come up with something different and original and Burtonizing the script, he himself wrote a first version of the draft that went nowhere, so the studio hired a writer called Sam Hamm that wrote the first version of Batman 89 that we know today. A script that in its structure was basically the movie that came out in cinemas at the time, but with one big difference. That was the inclusion of the character Robin in its original version. There was supposed to be a chase between Batman and the Joker that went through a circus arena in the middle of Gotham, and the Joker was going to shoot the ropes that hold the flying Graysons in the arena, killing both Dick Grayson's parents. The problem was that the scene was supposed to take place at the end of the second act, right after Bruce Wayne goes visit Vicky Vale in her apartment. So the addition of this character felt a little rushed, and it was not a good idea to introduce a character that is so important to the lore of Batman after 2 complete acts of the movie. And the scene has a storyboard that was created for the movie that is online on YouTube. So if you want to check it out for curiosity and know how the scene was supposed to take place, I will leave the link right down below in the description of the video. And at this point of the 80s, the 4 Superman movies with Christopher Reeve were already out. And talking a little bit about the problems of these productions, the first movie had an original script that was written by Mario Puzo. Mario Puzo is none other than the writer of the Godfather books. So then you must be thinking, wow, this first version of the script must have been great. No. It was a very cartoonish and comedic version of the story. For example, the actor James Caan, who was considered for the role of Superman at this time, said in an interview that there was a scene in the script that had Lois Lane in her office and Clark Kent put on the Superman suit to impress her. So he enters her office and once she sees him she says, "Oh Clark, that's cute, but come on, that doesn't make any sense. He is Superman." So this is when the screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz, the same one that I told you about the Batman first version of the script, came into the picture and wrote the version that we know as the great classic from 1978, Superman. So Superman 1 and Superman 2 were shot together but had many problems during production, like the changing of directors halfway into the shooting of the second movie. The legendary Richard Donner left the project and Richard Lester was hired for the picture. And he transformed the movie into something more comedic, adding some jokes that didn't fit the overall tone of the movie for me. But we can talk about these production issues in another video because the interesting thing was what the studio tried to do as a third Superman movie. So the idea in this third movie was to introduce Brainiac as the main villain. We would also have Mr. Mxyzptlk and the introduction of Kara Zor-El, the first Supergirl of the cinema. And the plot was that after the destruction of Krypton, Kara Zor-El was raised in space by Brainiac during all her youth, like an evil adoptive father. Then she manages to escape and come to Earth where she finds Superman and falls in love with him, because in this version, she is not his cousin. Then Brainiac comes to Earth as well, and he fights Superman, and the whole thing becomes like a love triangle between Superman, Brainiac, and Supergirl. That's bizarre. Not Bizarro the villain, but Bizarre the movie itself. During all this conflict, Mr. Mxyzptlk would arrive in the situation, remember that he's a goblin from another dimension, and screw things even more. So the studio didn't go ahead with this production, and they made Superman 3 and Superman 4 that are even more bizarre, quite trash in my opinion, but not trash in a good way. Oh, and we also had the terrible Supergirl solo movie that at least had the wonderful and gorgeous Helen Slater. And coming back to the Batman franchise, after the great success of the '89 movie, the studio already started plans for the sequel. So they called Sam Hamm, the writer of the first movie, to write Batman 2. And the initial plot of the first version of the script was very different from what Batman Returns ended up being. We had the same villains, Penguin and the Catwoman, but in very different versions. The Penguin was a escaped convict that used birds to commit his crimes, including killing people. And Catwoman was a femme fatale that came to Gotham to kill and steal from rich guys and frame Batman so he can be incriminated for her crimes. The whole plot had a tone that was more detective-esque and more adventure style. And the movie would have the inclusion of the Robin character again, but this time as a street kid who helps Batman escape from the cops at a certain point of the story. Not only that, but the movie would also have Vicky Vale still as a character in the franchise, and she would still be Batman's main love interest, plus he would propose her in the end of the movie. I read this script as well, and besides being very interesting and fun in some points, it wasn't very cinematic in my opinion, like a Batman movie should be. And the representation of the villains were not as good as the movie that we got. This story had a lot more plot, including a mystery of the rich families of Gotham City, including the Waynes, that had a dirty secret in the past. The movie would end with a climactic fight scene at the Batcave between Penguin, Catwoman, and Batman, since there was a treasure hidden underneath the Wayne Manor with all the wealth of these families. Well, Tim Burton once again didn't like this version of the script and called a guy named Daniel Waters to rewrite this version into the version that we know today, but with a main great difference. Robin again. Here we go again with the studio trying to force this character into the movies. And once again, this character would show up at the end of the second act of the movie, when Batman is running away from the cops after the Penguin's gang hacked his Batmobile. He would stop in a car repair where there was a kid working as a mechanic, and he would wear a jumpsuit with an R in his chest. And this character was cut from the script because once again he was too forced to enter in the second act of the movie.
And why? Why to introduce a character so late into the plot? But this time they did it too late because they actually cast an actor as Robin in the movie. The actor Marlon Wayans from the Scary Movie franchise. He was cast, he was actually paid, but his character was cut from the script. Again, he was cut from the script, so he didn't get to shoot any scenes for the movie. So don't bother because there's no existing images of Marlon Wayans as Robin. Even with the sour success of Batman Returns, since the studio wasn't happy with the dark tone that Tim Burton imprinted in it, and McDonald's wasn't keen on selling Happy Meals since it was very criticized by parents who didn't like the movie as well. Only one element could be developed from this movie since the door was left open for a sequel in the future, and that element was the Catwoman from Michelle Pfeiffer. So the Batman Returns screenwriter Daniel Waters was hired to write a solo movie for her. And the story would take place in a Las Vegas city in the middle of the desert, where we would find Selina Kyle working in hotels in the city. And she wouldn't remember her past as Catwoman in the beginning. She would only have mysterious scars in her body from the events of Batman Returns. With time, she would remember her past and get back to the leather suit as the villain. And since this was a Catwoman movie, she wouldn't be exactly a villain, but an anti-hero fighting villains in the city. A group of villains that would actually pretend to be superheroes acting on the benefit of the population, but actually controlling everything dirty in the city from the background by being a criminal organization. So it would be a Catwoman versus the superheroes movie. These superheroes being like the style of The Boys, that TV show. And Selina would have a rivalry/romance with the leader of the group that was a superhero named Captain God. Yeah, I know. I read this script as well, and it's kinda all over the place. There would be a scene where all women dress as Catwomen and go out to the streets to fight crime together, or something like that. And there wouldn't be any mention of Batman. Well, the studio obviously didn't go ahead with the project, especially because the script was delivered in the exact day of the release of a very famous movie that got a lot of money for them, called Batman Forever. And Batman Forever is not a very different version from the initial story in the first script. The difference is that the script is a more well-fleshed story, focusing in the duality of the character Batman/Bruce Wayne. So the story goes deeper into the psychological of the character and the division between his two personas, to the point that Bruce Wayne has to choose if he's going to be only Bruce Wayne or Batman as well. By the end, he ends up choosing to be Bruce Wayne and Batman as well. By the way, choosing to be Batman Forever, which links back to the name of the movie. A conclusion of arc that is not in the movie itself, even though the movie still has the name Batman Forever. And some of these deleted scenes were shot and can be found online on the internet if you look for them. Recently, in a podcast with the director Kevin Smith, he claimed to have seen this version of the movie, and he said that this version is indeed much more faithful to the original script. And comparing the two versions, he says that he can see that the version we got is a version that was cut or trimmed purely for commercial reasons. I'm so jealous of him having watched it. And that takes us to the fourth movie in the series, Batman and Robin, which is famously known as the worst movie of the franchise. And quite ironically, the version that we got is the same version of the original script as it was written. Yes, the movie that was written was the movie that was shot. And you can ask me 1,000 times, but Gus, why this movie was the one that they didn't try an alternative version or has a version of a darker movie with a lot of depth? And I tell you, my friends, I know, that's quite bizarre, but I love Batman and Robin. And we will talk about this in a video in the future. And coming back to the Superman series, after the fourth movie that was a complete disaster, the studio started to plan a fifth movie that would still have Christopher Reeve playing the main character. The first idea came in a script that would feature again Brainiac as the main villain, and he would shrink the city of Metropolis as he does in the comic books, and we would have a battle between him and Superman. At a certain point of the story, Superman would kinda die, but not really, and he would have to use Kryptonian technology to recover and fight the villain back at the end. That wasn't a script that pleased everyone, so in 1992, a very interesting and famous event happened in the history of the character in the comics. The release of the famous story Death of Superman, a story that featured the villain Doomsday coming to Earth and killing our hero. And this comic was such a hit that the studio immediately started to plan a movie that adapted this story more directly. Soon enough, two scripts were written called Superman Reborn, both written by different writers. The first script was quite bizarre and featured a story where Superman fought a villain, a creature made of his fears. Not exactly the creature Doomsday, but a Doomsday-ish creature. So he would die in combat and then would return in a very strange fashion. While dying, Superman would pass his vital energy to Lois Lane and she would become pregnant in the next months while he was dead. Then she would give a birth to this baby, and this child would grow very quickly in the next months or days, I don't remember now, till becoming a 21-year-old young fella, and he would be the new Superman. So, what a stupid idea. Then came a second version that was much more faithful to the comics, with the Doomsday creature being genetically created by Brainiac. Then he would arrive on Earth, he would kill Superman, Superman would resurrect later through Kryptonian technology, and besides having the villains Doomsday and Brainiac as mentioned, we would also have the Parasite and Silver Banshee. So the movie was too crowded for its own sake. So both scripts were not approved by the studio, to a young filmmaker named Kevin Smith, the director that I just mentioned before when I talked about the alternate version of Batman Forever, came into the picture, and his involvement with the project is probably the most famous and most interesting of the whole thing. But to talk about this, I will need another video in this channel, and if I could name this next episode, I would call it That Time When the Studio Wanted to Put Nicolas Cage in Every Franchise, Batman and Superman. And this is it for now. As you noticed during the video, the background was not from this channel, BATGUS, but from my other channel, Trashing with Gus, where I talk about other movies that I like, especially horror, trash, and animes. Because this video and the second part that I will release this week were originally posted in that channel. So if you are a fan of this kind of content and you would like to check it out, I'll leave the link right down here in the description and on the top of the screen, because there are a bunch of other good stuff in there as well, alright? And of course, if you are liking the content of BATGUS, don't forget to leave a like in this video and subscribe, alright? See you in the next Bat video, and bye bye.